These positions and games would be almost impossible in any other tanks, and I wanted to show you how these tanks are so good at doing what they do and how you can take advantage of them if you're playing them and how you can take them out if you see them in the game. Stay tuned because there is a ton we can learn from these games and I hope you enjoy. And so of course, what better way to start this video than to look at the T-29, the American tier 7 dominant heavy tank, and of course one of the more powerful tanks in the game at this tier, capable of ripping apart more than enough of the enemy team. And we're going to see how this tank is played on a map like Berlin. Now of course, one of the biggest things with American tanks is of course the use of their turret armor, and of course the T-29 does not disappoint in this regard, capable of dealing and bouncing rounds of tier 9s, and that allows you to play up in those top tier matchups where you can use the turret armor. Of course they can pen the top of the turret if they hit the cupola, and there is potential for them to overmatch the top of the tank as well if they have that super high caliber guns in the game. But key thing is to get into a position like you're seeing here where you can use that turret armor. So if you can do that in an American tank, it is going to come out better more often than it is going to come out worse. And so what you find here on this map is taking this position is a very crucial part, because what you can do from here is you can lock down opponents on the opposite side, and when you win this allows you to then progress the flanks on both the center of the map. You can get some really easy shots to help out all of your team in the central location, as well as deal with the enemy cap circle, put pressure on the cap, and of course force your opponent's hand to do something. And that's what is really important about playing tanks in this game, and the fact that you have this such a strong turret and the amazing accuracy, which is going to be one of the key aspects of American tanks in this video, is that you can essentially just farm down these opponents super quickly. You have good accuracy, you're forcing players to have to go for the turret. The KV-2 here cannot get the depression to aim down onto the hull armor, which is of course the weak point of the American heavies, but turret armor very strong. No way he's going to be able to easily pen it unless for some reason he manages to catch the cupola, which is very difficult anyway and would probably have to be firing AP. But a fantastic push from the town using that turret armor and coming away with a ridiculous win as he mops up a load of damage in the end of this game. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure that you stay tuned because there's tons more to come. But one thing that you could do right now to really help me out would be to like the video and subscribe if you're not, and I really do appreciate your time. Let's get back into it. And it's actually the guns of these American tanks that make them so powerful in this sort of scenario, because what you can do is you are so flexible that you can deal with medium tanks. The damage per minute of these tanks is very good as well, and that just gives you everything that you need when you can get these into the sorts of positions that you're hoping for to come away with a fantastic win. And you can see here just how easy it is to mop up the damage at the end of the game. Super nice, super swift, and that is what these American tanks can do. And a perfect push in Berlin to win the town and of course then progress towards the other flank. This is a typical case in point example of how Unicums can push through the town, and of course how you can maybe replicate it in your own tank. It doesn't have to be American, it just needs a bit of turret armor to duke it out with opponents that push into the opposite side of the town, and then of course taking a slower approach to go around and finish up the damage and win the game like you've seen here. Now Safe Haven is one of the maps that people struggle with on World of Tanks quite often. I see it a lot within the comment section and also on various different streams, platforms, etc., that people struggle with this map. So what I want to do is break it down with the American tank here, the M54 Renegade, and this tank is very good at being able to essentially just push forward and deal a ton of damage. It has the great accuracy, it has decent DPM, it has a little bit of armor if you take away that huge cupola on the top of the tank, and of course it's capable of duking it out with a lot of tanks. And you can see here the aggressive push to get into this location such that you can get up to the slope, which provides the whole protection that you do get, and of course they're going to have to aim down into your lower plate to be able to easily pen you, which is of course going to make it a little bit more difficult. But super nice to see the accuracy of these American tanks at this close ranges, which is one of the biggest things about why these tanks are great. Now Now there are some limitations with the American tanks, which I think we should probably talk about, and that is primarily that the side armor and of course hull armor is predicated on the fact that you can get hulled down, and that is pretty much with all of the tanks. Even things like the medium tanks have this sort of playstyle whereby you really can't side scrape a whole lot, and for those of you watching and you're seeing this 705 bounce off of the Renegade here, what you can do if you come into this situation is, because of the Americans' raised engine deck at the back, when they try and side scrape, if you can't auto pen the side anyway, is you can actually hit this engine deck as it is raised up, and you can hit it from the front to the back. So it's another like weapon in your arsenal when you're coming up against these American tanks, and of course is an easy way to pen if you can hit it. Obviously depends on if you can, and with the accuracy of these American tanks, it is certainly a lot harder to hit them. But one of the key things in this replay is that the enemy teams are pushing quite aggressively, but in this map this usually happens. You usually get attacked from 3 different fronts. You've got from behind you, which people will come down, you've got this central area, and then where this VKP is. Now the VKP position is one of the crucial points on Safe Haven, because if you let this one slide, they'll come up from behind you, and it's a big sausage sandwich which no one wants to actually see. But you can see here, use of getting the hull down using the wreck of the 705. This is what you want, but unfortunately a nice little shot into the cupola of this tank really does end up causing some issues. But with the good APCR round pen, he tries to go for the cupola, and of course it unfortunately misses. But at this point it's a case of you could probably just pen the side of the tank. You can use the mobility that these American tanks have. They have much usually better at being able to get into position. They are better traverse speed, etc. That can just be so much more versatile, and that is what you want with these sorts of tanks, and how he's been able to pick up 4,500 damage and manage to come away with the result that he has. Now unfortunately the IS-6 Black is on a decent amount of hit points. He's farmed him down a little bit, and what you can do is of course just use the accuracy to just keep tracking these opponents, keep going for the track and pen straight through this frontal drive wheel that we've been seeing. And then of course, because the IS-6 has a terrible turret, or at least the roof of the turret is awful, you can pretty much pen it with almost everything that you'll meet it with, to be honest. And it's quite a prominent kind of top of the tank, which is very easy. It's just basically terrible, and that's where the accuracy comes in even better, is that you can do things like that. If you're in a Soviet tank, or if you're in something like a German super heavy or a heavy tank, it's a little bit more difficult to reliably pen because they have the higher alpha damage. They don't have these consistent, almost medium tank-esque guns that these American ones do. Now, given that the enemy team have actually pushed from the southern side of the map, they're making their way around to the base. Of course, the M54 does decide to actually turn around and go towards the cap, or at least the friendly cap, so they don't get capped out. It's awful when that happens. And the mobility of these American tanks is generally probably in the region of about 35 to 50 kilometers an hour, depending on what sort of tank you're playing. Obviously, that's disregarding the kind of light tanks in the game, but of course very good for these heavy tanks, and they are more of those medium heavy playstyle tanks that have, you know, those good strong turrets, which is how they can work so effectively and how he's been able to deal with this game, as you've been seeing. Now, with the game being very tense, of course you've got to rely on the fact that your team are gonna not support you now, so you have to deal with this situation as best as you can on your own, because with the SU-122-44, the only other tank in the game being right at the back next to the cap circle, covering it from the Cheeto SP, it's really down to you on this flank. And with there being 3 vehicles over here, you really have to use the strengths of these American tanks to pull off the win, and that is using that accuracy and trying to put yourself in a position where you can get hold down, or at least use the turret armor and make it very difficult for the enemy teams to be able to get a shot into the hull armor, which is what is going to yield you the best chance of winning the game. Now there are of course 2 artilleries and a Cheeto SP, which should be a pretty easy win from this point, and he just goes in and farms up the last remaining vehicles to come away with the win. Unlike traditional heavies like the E75, the Concept 1B has the ability to push forward using the speed and also using the fact that it can go hold down with a great turret armor when you're looking at it from the front, and also the fact that you have a really decent gun when you can get it working with 400 alpha, and it's just a machine that's capable of tearing apart a lot of the opponents that you'll be facing. So when Unicums get in this and take an aggressive position at the start of the game, you can really do a big benefit for your team, and also the fact that you can support a lot of the mediums who are going to be pushing with you at the same time than you would in something like an E75, which just takes that extra bit of time to get to the frontal position. And when you're coming up against the enemy mediums, which you know have pushed it up to the same positions that you have, because of course you have that extra speed, you are essentially at a big advantage when you can get into this sort of position, and it allows you to do things like this, which we've seen on Abby, and it is a common push, but it's just not possible in some of the super heavy tanks unless of course you're waiting to the later stages of the game. It's only now the enemy T10 has been able to push as far as he has, and of course that means that you can take that advantageous position at the beginning and force the opponent's hand, which is what the Americans do really well at. Now, coupled with the fact that the gun depression of these tanks is fantastic, looking, you know, in the region of about 8 to 10 degrees depending on what sort of tank you're playing on the American line, gives you that flexibility which a lot of the other tanks don't give you. I mean, for example, E75 does get the 8 degrees, but things like the IS-3 and the Soviet heavy tanks, they would dream of being able to get anything more than, you know, 6 degrees of gun depression. So it's fantastic to have that opportunity to play on those ridge lines and use those excellent turrets to be able to pull off games that are ridiculous. And with this game in particular, you're seeing how dominant these tanks can be when they do get on that front foot, when they are the tanks that push forward, and they can keep outputting that damage using the brilliant accuracy and being able to duke it out with some of the top tier mediums in the game as well. So this is what the kind of tanks can do, and why you want to make sure that you know the weak points of their turrets and the kind of downfalls of what these tanks are like, hence the engine decks and some of the more nuanced areas of tanks like the Concept 1B, where you can pen the turret and stuff like that, and of course some of the side armor weak points and being able to just catch it in the side of the turret. So it's very much a case of these tanks being very good in these aggressive positions, and of course when you know what sort of things the enemy teams are likely to do, and just prediction in these tanks is one of the biggest things that's going to change your game. And of course one of the main things that I always focus on when playing these American tanks, things like the M6 at the lower tiers are just absolutely unbelievable to be able to pick up decent amounts of damage, and the Concept 1B here at the beginning of the game, having lost barely any health, has picked up 4,000 damage, and it is almost ridiculous how easy it seemed to look. Now obviously poking tanks like a T30 is not a good idea in most vehicles, but if you're using the fact that, you know, you can use the accuracy bonuses to peek around, whereas they have to, you know, sit there and fully aim for the entire time to reliably be able to pen you and of course hit you in the first place, and you can see there the T30 just fluff that shot straight into the rock. So it's just a case of, you know, knowing your strengths and weaknesses in these American tanks to pull off those big wins. And you can see there the T30 had the small gun anyway, and he bounced off the turret of the Concept 1B. With only an M103 on this flank, it's now time to pressure that central location, which is essentially what always happens in these games. But I want to show you something that players often always forget about when they do push from this location, and that is to stop and farm up the damage that's already in front of you. Now a lot of players will literally just go straight towards the cap up there, take a ton of damage as they cross, and then they're not going to be able to farm up any more damage. Instead, you should just be doing what you're doing here, slimming down that angle, getting the damage in where you can, finding tanks like the Conway that have obviously been trying to contest the middle, and it's basically free damage. And of course, even if there's tons of tanks in the middle, you can essentially just keep them locked down by only subjecting yourself to just one tank at a time. That's going to give you the biggest chance to deal more damage and also be able to just impact the game way more, and of course limit your chances of being, you know, triple tapped by a ton of tanks all at one go. So you can see here once again Type 61 having a little bit of problems with the terrain and yet again shut down, picking up over 8,000 damage. Now, given the fact that the enemy team were starting to progress and there was no team support, he decided to go back, help out with the M103, and now returns to this position where he finds both of the waffles on a huge amount of hit points, and so loads the HE rounds that these tanks get to be able to deal a ton of damage all in one go. And obviously, if you are in your games and you're seeing anything that has the lightly armored vehicles, you should always be thinking to load HE, and that is where Intuition and the update to Intuition comes in just staggeringly good, and that is where you want to be using Intuition. I always typically have it as either the second or third perk on my loader to be able to just improve my gameplay and give you that flexibility, along with the fact that the tanks in general as Americans always seem to give you more flexibility anyway. But you can see here the waffle is in a sticky situation, and with a nice little round there going straight into the turret of the Waffle Panzer IV, he picks up the final one of the final tanks in the game, and over 10,000 damage so far. And then a quick little final shot into the waffle on this side manages to finish him off, sets him on fire, and then finishes him off with a ram. So yeah, just how you want to do it. And of course, dealing 11,000 damage, goes on to win the game and comes out with a fantastic result to show for it. This next replay shows exactly why, even in the low tier tanks, these are super dominant, and we are seeing the M6 like we touched on earlier. This is one of the most powerful tier 6 heavy tanks in the game, having the ability to deal outrageous amounts of damage. And we've got a Kolobanovs incoming within this replay. So obviously pushing straight into the town is one of the things that you can do in the M6. It's not the slowest of heavy tanks, and it allows you a little bit of flexibility like we've already mentioned, and of course has a decent amount of alpha damage but kicks it out so quickly, which is what makes the M6 so dangerous, along with the fact that it has somewhat bouncy armor if you are coming up against the mediums at the tier. But with a load of the enemy tanks coming in from behind, include the VK, you have the Type 64, the KV-1, all surrounding the town area, they're starting to re-enter the town, and it's going to have to be a defense from here to come away with the win. But of course, slow peaking in the M6 is not what you want to be doing, but instead taking the initiative to try and slim down shots and get shots like this, where you can track opponents using the decent accuracy that these American tanks have to just lock down those tracks and deal a ton of damage. And of course, that is what he does consistently throughout this replay to come away with a ridiculous amount of damage, and of course pick up the win when he probably shouldn't have done, and probably never would have done if he was using any other tank or any other nation's tank. The enemy team at this location have decided that they are going to try and come up from behind and sausage sandwich the rest of his team, which is not good. And of course, the eastern flank is basically crumbling at this point by the fact that the T-34-85M are coming up behind the T-50-2 and some of his other teammates that were over there to finish them off, leaving him, another M6 and a KV-1 as the only tanks left in the game. Now, given the fact that the M6 has actually got fairly decent view range for a tier 6 heavy tank, he's able to actually spot for his team to a degree, and allows him to get a little bit of assistance, as well as keep these tanks lit up for his team and farm them up and hopefully come away with that victory that they have been deserving from the entire start. Now, unfortunately, his teammate in the KV-1 gets finished off by the S-35CA, bringing it to a 1 versus 6 scenario, as he quickly shuts down then the Sherman Jumbo, the M4A32, to be able to come away into this sort of scenario. But with such a low amount of hit points left, and with 2,125 hit points left on the enemy team, it really is a case of hoping that he can finish off the last remaining tanks and then deal with the artillery. But with an S-35CA on the enemy team, the French tier 5 tank destroyer, it is a little bit of a careful one as to whether or not he's going to be able to push and, more importantly, outspot the S-35. So he's really got to hope that the S-35 is actually making the aggressive push towards him. Now, he can only realistically take one from the S-35. Luckily, he does actually bounce, and it's all curtains for him, which is what this tank can do. It has very, very good side armor for this tier, and I can certainly guarantee that if you're using this tank in this sort of position, you're capable of being able to deal a ton of damage, win a load of games, and of course using that really, really consistent main armament that this tank gets, it really does become a joy to play, and actually one of the easiest tanks to play in my opinion at this tier, making this just a ridiculously good tank. And you can see here it's a case of a BDR G1B, which of course can pen him, but of course he's got to go for the weak points of the M6, which at this sort of tier, it's probably a little bit more difficult. And given the fact that the M6 doesn't actually follow the traditional version of a tank like this, then yeah, there is no real lower plate visible on this tank, so makes it a little bit more difficult for players that maybe haven't been at this tier for very long to really deal with him. But with the AMX 13 AM doing probably the only thing he can really do at this point, trying to go in and YOLO, yeah, I mean it just ain't gonna go very well for him, and he shuts him down and then leaves it with just a 1v1, at which point he's just got to go and find the SU-122A. And so he decides to push towards the enemy base on the railway track, and hopefully manages to find this SU in the base somewhere. The SU is making an aggressive push, catches the M6 off guard. It could be curtains right here if he does manage to pen, but it derps straight into the floor, and he secures the final kill of the game to pull out that Kolobanov's and a Chadley Walters medal, or the Radley Walters medal as it's actually called. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Don't forget to actually subscribe if you do enjoy this video, and of course if you want to see more positions and tanks just like this video and learn how to carry in some more tanks in the game, then of course check out this video on screen, and then of course check out some of the other content that we have on this channel, which is dedicated towards trying to help and improve you guys, and of course hopefully entertain you as well. And I'll see you in the next one, hopefully. Goodbye.